She was meant for one prince, but ended up with his brother. And from that moment on, nothing went as expected. The story of the girls of Great Britain and Ireland, Tiara, begins not with diamonds or splendor, but with loss. In December 1891, Princess Mary of Teck, a quiet, intelligent young woman of noble but not royal birth, became engaged to Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and heir to the British throne. It was a match both romantic and strategic. But just a few weeks after their engagement, Albert died suddenly during a flu epidemic. The grief was public, but for Mary, it was deeply personal. She had not only lost a fiancé, but also a place in a future she had begun to imagine. And then, silence. And then, a proposal from his brother, Prince George, Duke of York. George had been in love with someone else, a cousin, as tradition often encouraged. But his duty came first, and Mary, steady and composed even in sorrow, said yes. But the new bride needed more than resilience. She needed symbols of belonging, visible signs that the women of the empire stood behind her. That's when Lady Eva Greville entered the stage. Daughter of the Earl of Warwick, Lady Greville was a woman of action. She formed a fundraising committee made up of women from across Britain and Ireland, a symbolic gesture of unity in a time when such gestures mattered. They called themselves the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland. Their goal, to gift the future Duchess of York a tiara worthy of her new role. They expected modest success. They received more than they could spend. The tiara they commissioned was delicate and versatile, a garland of diamond fleur-de-lis set in silver and gold, topped with 13 oriental pearls. It could be worn as a full crown, a smaller circlet, or even transformed into a necklace. But the story doesn't end with sparkle. With the extra funds and at Mary's personal request, they donated to the widows and children of sailors lost in the tragic HMS Victoria collision, a naval disaster that shook the nation that same year. The tiara did not appear at the royal wedding. Mary chose instead a diamond fringe tiara from Queen Victoria, but this gift from the girls would become her favorite, and it would travel through the decades as a symbol of remembrance, resilience, and a kind of quiet grace that neither time nor tragedy could tarnish. Because sometimes the jewels that shine brightest are the ones born from sorrow. She wore it like a crown, but never let it become the center of her soul. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara entered Mary's life, now Duchess of York, as a token of recognition and prestige. But from the very beginning, it carried a different melody. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was armor. Light, radiant, precisely crafted to sit on a royal head, yes, but still armor. A visible confirmation of an inner strength. In 1901, an era ended. Queen Victoria passed away. Mary and George became the Prince and Princess of Wales. They were already parents, already seasoned in public appearances. They knew that the future, though uncertain, had chosen them. The tiara, once a sentimental engagement gift, began appearing with Mary more and more often at official events. At the coronation of King Edward VII in 1902, George's father, a monarch full of charm and appetite, Mary wore this tiara. The hall was packed. Heavy carpets, muffled footsteps, gilded ceilings caught candlelight. And her jewel didn't dazzle, it anchored. It didn't command, it reminded. The woman who wore it already understood that true power doesn't need noise. Mary was reserved, almost unreadable. They said she could enter a room without leaving a sound. And in that silence lay her style, not softness, but solidity. When Edward VII passed in 1910, George and Mary became king and queen, George V and Queen Mary. The new queen's portrait, still featuring the tiara with pearls, was painted by George K. Wilmshurst and published in the Illustrated London News. Mary's gaze was direct yet distant. Her face held no visible emotion, only readiness to rule, to endure, to remain silent. And yet, even crowns sometimes crave change. In 1914, Mary had the tiara redesigned. She asked Garrett, the royal jeweler, to remove the 13 pearls and replace them with diamonds. Why? She never said. Maybe the pearls were too soft, too intimate, too fragile for a queen. They were placed in another tiara, the lover's knot, which would later grace the heads of Princess Diana and Princess Catherine. Mary also had the lower bandeau, a diamond base with geometric motifs, detached so it could be worn separately. No one questioned her choices. They didn't need to, because Mary understood. Anything that stays frozen too long is eventually forgotten, and a queen, like a tiara, must know how to adapt, to remain herself but reflect her time. Slowly, the tiara began to disappear from public view. Mary wore it less frequently. Did she still favor it, or was she preparing it for its next chapter? Years passed. The music of court balls faded into echo. The empire shifted. Jewels were no longer adornments. They became silent statements. And then, one day, Queen Mary opened the velvet case once more, not to wear it again, but to pass it forward. It was no longer a jewel. It had become an emotional heirloom, light captured in silver, a tiara ready to be reborn. She opened the velvet case, gently, as if inside was not air, but something far more fragile. And there it was, the tiara, not just an ornament, but a vessel of memory. In every curve, a whisper from a century past. In every diamond, the echo of gazes long since gone. Queen Mary, by now a widow, a shadow of the previous era, knew her time was drawing to a close. But not everything should leave with her. Some things must outlive us. It was 1947. London smelled of ash and hope. The buildings still remembered the bombings. The shops were empty. People moved more from resolve than strength. Even the monarchy, once an unquestionable power, now had to redefine itself, not as a political force, but as a symbol. That's when Mary made her decision. She would gift the tiara to her granddaughter, a young woman who already carried the weight of the future. Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne, composed, dutiful, and still so young. The gift was to be a wedding present. Elizabeth was about to marry Philip, a naval officer, a prince without fortune, but with character. A marriage of love, not politics, a rare thing in royal halls. The tiara, born of a collective gesture by women, was now to be passed on, not only as a jewel, but as a message. Elizabeth accepted it with tenderness. She didn't refer to it formally. She simply called it Granny's tiara. No distance, no theatrics, as if it weren't an object, but a gesture, an unbroken thread between women who knew what it meant to carry the weight of a crown, not on the head, but on the heart, the shoulders, the silence. And then something unexpected happened. On the morning of the wedding, November 20th, 1947, in the heart of the bridal whirlwind, the tiara broke, literally. One of the frame's joints snapped, as if it wasn't ready to witness that moment. The royal jewelers from Gerrard were rushed to Buckingham Palace under police escort. They had just a few hours. Under a pressure no clock could measure, they repaired the tiara, but not in time. Elizabeth chose another one for the ceremony. Was it coincidence? A sign? A subtle protest from history? We'll never know. But when the dress was packed away, the fireworks faded, and the headlines yellowed, the tiara began its second life. Elizabeth first wore it publicly during a state visit to Paris in 1948. From that moment on, it became her faithful companion. Not the most opulent, but the most personal. Over time, the tiara would appear on her head during key moments: banquets, diplomatic visits, official portraits. It would be seen on stamps, coins, banknotes. It became the signature silhouette of the queen. Wherever her image appeared, there too was that delicate, familiar crown of diamonds, the tiara. And then, her father's passing. King George VI died in 1952. Elizabeth became queen. She was 25. And in her first public appearance after the funeral in Edinburgh, June 1952, she wore that very tiara. There was no sparkle. There was a choice, a symbol. From that moment on, the tiara became more than an adornment. It became a beacon, always present in the moments that mattered. Australia, 1954. London, 1955. Morocco, 1980. Hungary, 1993. The Natural History Museum in 2000. Decade after decade, the world changed. The queen matured, but the tiara remained the same. It didn't need to evolve because it was never just a jewel. It was her voice without words. It was a promise that everything was still in its place. It wasn't the largest. It wasn't the most expensive. And yet, it became the most important. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, light, modest, understated, slowly began to settle into the collective consciousness. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't shine louder than the rest. And yet, it stayed with you. Why? Because it was real. When Queen Elizabeth II began wearing this tiara in public, she didn't do so with theatrical grandeur. She didn't have to. It simply belonged to her. It wasn't chosen by stylists or elevated by fashion magazines. It became part of her visual language, as familiar as her handbag, her gloves, her calm, composed gaze. But the more she wore it, the more it transformed into something greater than an accessory. It became a signature, not just of the queen, but of the monarchy itself. It happened gradually. First, it appeared in portraits, then on postage stamps, later on coins, and finally on banknotes. Few ever asked, why this tiara? But the answer was clear. Because it was Elizabeth. She didn't chase trends, she didn't seek spectacle, she was herself, and the world trusted her for it. And so, without fanfare, without any branding campaign, this modest diamond tiara became the most iconic royal jewel in the world. Because when the Queen's face began appearing on official documents across the Commonwealth, it was this delicate diamond shape that became a part of the national visual identity. Every day, millions of people in Britain and beyond saw this tiara on mail, on currency, in museums, on official seals. And without knowing it, they began to associate it with security, continuity, and quiet dignity. What once was simply a piece of jewelry became a mnemonic anchor. These things don't happen overnight. It wasn't the result of marketing. It was the result of decades of presence, steadiness, and restraint. The Queen didn't change her image every season. She didn't refresh her brand. She didn't need a new version of herself. Her power lay in consistency, and this tiara became her emblem. Over time, for many, the tiara ceased to be an object. It became an idea, something familiar, quiet, and ever-present, something that whispered, "We're still here. She is still our queen. The world still makes sense." And in that quiet, in that certainty, lay the tiara's true power. Not in its carats, not in its pearls or brilliance, but in the fact that it endured, quietly, gracefully, from one generation to the next. It wasn't modern, it wasn't extravagant, and yet it was the one she chose when the whole world was watching. As Queen Elizabeth II began traveling across continents, the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara always came with her. Not like a heavy crown of empire, not as an exotic showpiece for formal portraits, but as a trusted companion, one that knew when to shine and when to simply be. Because Elizabeth didn't wear the tiara as an accessory, she wore it as a gesture, silent but unmistakable. Whenever she appeared with that tiara, it was understood, this moment matters. Australia, a historic royal tour, crowds, heat, endless ceremonies, and on the Queen's head, that familiar shape, delicate but distinct, seen up close, photographed from afar, sparkling but never seeking attention. The premiere of To Catch a Thief, starring Grace Kelly, London elegance, red carpet, flashing cameras, and she, as always, calm, wearing the same tiara, not trying to compete with movie stars. She didn't need to, because she was a star of a different kind. Morocco, a state banquet. Elizabeth raises a toast to King Hassan II. She wears the tiara with diamonds and pearls, not to impress, but to mark the moment. This tiara was not made to dazzle. It was made to confirm presence. Because it didn't tell a story, it witnessed one. And over time, it became something more. It became a bridge, connecting continents, connecting generations, connecting Elizabeth to the women before her and to those who would follow. In 1993, the tiara turned 100. There was no grand celebration, no televised tribute, no commemorative speech. Elizabeth simply wore it to a state banquet in Budapest, in a bright pink dress, smiling, steady, composed. And in that simple gesture, she seemed to say, "We're still here." No more was needed. This tiara didn't demand applause. It didn't ask to be noticed. Its power came from its stillness. Like a hand that gently steadies your arm. Like a light that always turns on at the same hour. Like a promise that even if the world changes, some things remain. And that's why this tiara became the most private of public symbols, not reserved for coronations, not displayed in museums, but present in moments when the Queen had to be most herself. It was never just a jewel. It was a language, quiet, precise, unwavering. And through it, without a single word, she told the world, "It's still me. It's still the monarchy. It's still our story." It didn't promise the future. It served as a reminder of what had already endured. As Queen Elizabeth II aged and the monarchy became more ceremonial than sovereign, the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara never lost its meaning. On the contrary, it became a quiet pillar, just like its wearer, unshakable, composed, deeply rooted. This wasn't a tiara for dramatic entrances. It didn't gleam under 1,000 flashbulbs. It appeared when there was a need for the weight of tradition, without spectacle, without noise. It was like a low harmony behind a grand aria, unobtrusive, yet essential. It carried meaning. When people saw Elizabeth wearing the tiara, they didn't just see a queen. They saw continuity, not of one woman, but of a lineage, an institution, an idea. And perhaps that's why the tiara was never altered again. No new stones were added. Its design was never modernized. It remained immune to fashion and time, just like Elizabeth herself. As the years passed, in a world increasingly obsessed with novelty and spectacle, this tiara became a manifesto of quiet resistance. It didn't shout, it stood with dignity. And in that silence lay something deeper than in 1,000 royal speeches. People came and went, the media speculated, rumors swirled. But when Elizabeth appeared, in the same tiara as always, the world felt one thing: reassurance. And so, when her likeness appeared on coins, stamps, and notes, no one questioned it. There was no debate. Because it wasn't a branding choice, it was a grounding force, a way of saying, the monarchy is still here, the spine still holds. It didn't matter who was in government, or how Britain was changing, or what the world was becoming. As long as this tiara existed, and as long as Elizabeth wore it, there remained a sense that something unchanged still lived. It wasn't about elegance. It was about psychological stability. In a world that trembled and transformed, there was a woman, and there was a tiara, and nothing else needed to be said. And so, without fanfare or headlines, this delicate diamond circle became the strongest silence modern history had ever seen. It didn't have a place in the royal coat of arms. It wasn't written into any constitution. And yet, it became more recognizable than most flags. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, delicate, almost weightless in appearance, slowly transformed into a silent emblem, a graphic mark of monarchy, an image that needed no caption. Because when people looked at Queen Elizabeth II's profile, whether engraved on a coin, printed on a stamp, or placed in a schoolbook, there it was. The tiara. Not as a decoration, not as a luxury, but as a line of continuity, so familiar it became invisible, like a pulse beneath the skin. And even as the monarchy shifted in meaning through the decades, as the world accelerated, as language, values, and rituals evolved, this one thing stayed the same. The tiara wasn't just a part of her wardrobe, it was a time anchor. One glance, and people felt that everything was still intact, that despite the chaos, the world still had a point of reference. It's no coincidence that this particular image, this tiara, was chosen for currency, because money demands trust, and the Queen's tiara became a guarantee of that trust, a value you can't calculate in carats. Eventually, people stopped noticing it. It was obvious. It was always there. And in that very obviousness lay its magic. Just like we don't think every day about the existence of the moon, but if it disappeared, something inside us would crack. The tiara was like that. It held the world's shape together. It didn't seek attention. It didn't blaze. It simply was. And because of that, it became the most powerful symbol the British monarchy had in the 20th and 21st centuries. Not the coronation, not the throne, not the bloodline, but a delicate band of diamonds worn by a woman who never had to shout to be heard, because everything that truly mattered had already been said in silence. It didn't change hands, it wasn't passed from one to another, and yet it traveled the entire world. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara was present wherever the Queen's presence truly mattered, packed carefully into travel cases, shipped from continent to continent, but always with the same reverence, as if it wasn't just jewelry, but a testament of continuity. As the monarchy gradually became more symbolic than sovereign, it was pieces like this, light, discreet, yet deeply familiar, that helped sustain the rhythm of ritual. For Elizabeth II wasn't only a queen, she was a constant presence in a world that changed faster than ever before. And in a time when trust had become rare, every detail of her appearance carried meaning. And this tiara, spoke one quiet, unwavering message. It's still me. It's still us. It appeared in Paris during her early state visits, in London at major film premieres, in Morocco, in Australia, in Canada, in Budapest during the tiara's centennial year, at the Natural History Museum in London beside Queen Margaret II of Denmark. Unchanged, discreet, significant. There was no need for fanfare. No one had to explain where it came from, how old it was, who made it. One glance was enough, and you knew, this moment matters. It didn't shine brighter than the rest, but it shone when it needed to. And that's why, over time, it became almost invisible. Not because it vanished, but because it merged with the very image of the Queen. It was like a shadow that follows light, like a signature that appears automatically. And perhaps that's why it never sparked debate. It didn't need to be defended. It didn't need justification. It was untouchable because it wasn't merely a thing. It had become a language of presence. And you don't question a language, you recognize it. That's why, even after long silences, when the tiara reappeared, it never looked outdated. It never looked like something from a museum. It always looked as if it had simply returned to its place. No guilt, no drama, no grand comeback. Because something that never truly left doesn't need to return. It had no stage, no grand finale, and yet its disappearance was noticed. Over the years, Queen Elizabeth II wore the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara less and less, not because she no longer cherished it, not because it lost its meaning, but perhaps because time, that quietest of advisors, began speaking in a different tone. The monarchy evolved, the world accelerated, and while the Queen remained ever present, she began to step back, passing more and more responsibilities to the younger generation. The tiara stayed behind, in its velvet-lined box, in the shadows, not of forgetfulness, but of respect. Because Elizabeth understood something few rulers do, that not everything precious needs to be shown constantly, that some symbols grow more powerful when they are silent. And so she didn't pass it on, not right away. She didn't gift it to a new duchess. She didn't wear it at jubilees. She simply let it rest. Was she waiting for the right moment, the right person? Or, as she had done so many times before, did she just instinctively know that the time had not yet come for the tiara to speak again? It remains an open question, like so much of Elizabeth II's legacy, unspoken yet deeply meaningful. And in those quiet final years, as the tiara vanished from the spotlight, it became, paradoxically, more powerful than ever. Because anyone who had followed her reign, anyone who had once seen her wear it, anyone who had glimpsed it on a coin or a stamp, noticed its absence, not as a loss, but as a sign of time passing, because true symbols don't fade, they settle into memory, And the girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, this quietest of crowns, became, in Elizabeth's final years, a footnote of legend. Not loudly declared, not paraded, but kept, like a secret, known to all who looked closely. And in that subtlety, in that nearly ascetic silence, the tiara didn't lose its power, it gained depth. Because sometimes the most precious things don't vanish, they simply wait. No one knows exactly where it is. No one knows who opens the box. But one thing is certain, it still exists. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara has not been forgotten. It hasn't been retired. It hasn't been locked away in a museum. It has simply been kept. Perhaps it awaits its next wearer. Perhaps it has already been passed down, discreetly, without cameras, without fanfare. Or perhaps, as always, it is simply waiting for the right moment. Because this tiara, more than any other, taught us that true power does not lie in brilliance, but in silence, in presence that does not dominate, in a symbol that doesn't shout, but speaks more deeply than words. This is not a tiara to be borrowed lightly, not a prop, not a fashionable detail. It is a relic of feminine endurance, a quiet crown for those who never sought greatness, but carried it with dignity, for those who didn't choose power, but simply were it. No one knows who will wear it next. Will it be a duchess, a queen, a princess? Someone who knows the weight of expectation, of silence, of responsibility. Perhaps it will grace the head of someone who never dreamed of a crown, someone who never planned to be a symbol, someone who, by necessity, becomes one. And when that day comes, no trumpets will sound, no headlines will shout, no ceremony will announce it. The tiara will return, quietly, naturally, as if it had never left. On a new head, in a new age, under new light, but with the same story locked in its diamonds, with the same glow that, though softened, never faded, because some things don't end, some symbols don't vanish, and some tiaras. Wait, in a world of fleeting trends, where the value of things is measured in views and headlines, this tiara became something entirely different, a symbol of endurance. It wasn't the most expensive, it wasn't the largest, but it outlived monarchs, wars, eras, and fashions, because it wasn't created to dazzle. It was created to accompany. For over a century, it was worn by women who could never simply be themselves. They always had to be more. A daughter, a wife, a queen, a symbol, a silence, an answer to questions no one dared to ask aloud. And yet, each of them, Mary, Elizabeth, gave the tiara something personal, a memory, a tenderness, a story, and each of them knew when to wear it and when to let it be still. Today, we may not know exactly where it is, but maybe that no longer matters, because true tiaras don't live in velvet boxes. They live in images, in memory, in symbols that outlast even the world that created them. And one day, in a time entirely different from our own, under a new light, someone will open the case again, touch the metal, see that familiar glint, and understand this is not just a tiara, it is a story.